Alrighty, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of our TSG podcast. As always, I'm your host, Coach Arian, and in this episode, it's going to be a solo episode. So, again, you're going to be stuck listening to me for this episode. I hope you guys enjoy this one. What I want to bring to you all today is this idea of how to set yourself up for success for a competition. The reason for this is kind of like the time that I'm recording this episode, a lot of championships are starting to come up as far as like the IPF has the bench press world championships, the classic world championships coming up for us here, like in Powerlifting America. I'm going to be heading to our Powerlifting America age division nationals coming up. So even though this episode's coming out after some of these competitions, I'm recording it before. So it kind of on my mind is preparing for these different high level championships and how an athlete can then set themselves up for success for these championships. And the reason why this is important is because you can do everything right in training. Okay. You can spend 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks training really hard, doing things right, getting stronger. And then you can kind of screw it up or mess everything up at the very end. So if you mess up your peak and go too heavy too close, or you deload too long, then you can kind of mess up your peak and not perform on competition day the way that training has been going. In addition, if on competition day you do things wrong, like you aren't timing your warm-ups properly, you're not picking your attempts properly, you're not making weight properly, then those can also lead to underperforming and not showing what you actually did in training. So in training, you might have like been able to get, let's say, 100 kilo squat, and then in competition, you only get 95 or 90. So it's not showing what you were truly capable of because of these maybe a little smaller screw ups or even bigger screw ups, if you want to say it that way, along the way in those final weeks, final days, or even actual competition day. So it becomes very important as you get closer and closer to the competition to make sure you're doing things right to set yourself up for success. And that's the same thing I try and do as a coach when I'm coaching my athletes is how can I make sure that my athlete is doing all those things right and I am preparing them for them to be able to do those things right to make sure they can maximize their potential on competition day to show what they were truly capable of from training. Because no one wants to go through an entire training cycle and then have nothing to show for it at the very end. Since obviously the competition is the most important thing for powerlifters, you want to hit certain numbers, you want to qualify for certain championships, you want to win certain titles or break certain records. And so everything you do in training is leading up to that final point. And so we want to make sure we are in our best position possible on that final point on competition day. And it's the same thing for every other sport. Right now in the US, we have different playoffs going on for hockey and for basketball. And so obviously these players have been practicing in the off season. The teams have been putting their team together and their strategy and everything. And they've been going through all the regular season to get to this point in the postseason. And now these days, as far as the competitions, each game is where they want to show their best performance. Okay. What they did in the gym, in practice, whatever, doesn't really matter. It's where they're doing now in these actual games that are going to lead to the championship. So same thing for you who you are a powerlifter, whether you're doing it more as a hobby or whether you're trying to do it more as a professional, then you want to perform your best on competition day. So what can we do or what areas should we be focusing on to make sure we have this success on meet day? Okay. The first thing that comes to my mind, okay, not in any particular order, but one of the first things that come to my mind that I see some people do a good job with and some people not do a good job with is having some kind of meet day plan or meet day strategy. And what I mean by that is having some kind of document, okay, of your plan of attack going into this competition. Okay, so what are you going to do for warm-ups and what are you going to do for attempts? Okay, and the people who do a good job of this are very detailed and everything. So, for example, and I'll show you some examples of my own clients as well. But for now, just for example, you want to know what warm-up weights are you doing? How many reps are you doing for each of those warm-up weights? Maybe the timing of when you're going to do the warm-up weight, and then what attempts you're going to be doing. First attempt, second attempt, third attempt, potentially having options for second attempts and third attempts as well. So that would be kind of more higher level meet day strategy as far as having all the information there. Now, what are some mediocre meet day strategies. What I've seen from my time, 10 plus years of coaching, from coaching a lot of people just on meet day or even being a national team coach and seeing what people who self coach or have other coaches kind of give to them is sometimes the coaches will give them the attempts, but not give them warm ups. And so then they're like kind of just winging their warm ups or doing whatever warm ups they do in the gym, which is not always the same as what you should do in competition. Or maybe having the warm ups and the opening attempt, but then nothing there for the second and third attempts. And they're just like, we'll figure it out in the moment based on how things are going. And so those things can be maybe a good start, but obviously they have weaknesses to them because you are then relying in the moment to make the decision. So, for example, if you have the attempts but no warm ups, then when it comes time to get in the warm up room and start warming up, then you have to start talking to the coach, or the coach has to start asking you as an athlete, hey, what do you normally do in the gym? What do you feel comfortable jumping from your last warm up to your opening attempt? What do you need to do before you get underneath the bar? And at that same time, they may be warming up other people as well if they have multiple athletes that they're working with in a particular session. So that may slow them down, or that may lead to you being neglected because they're focused on the people that have a plan and everything timed out perfectly. And the same thing the other way. If you have the warm-ups and the opening attempts, hey, maybe that's a good start. You can warm up and you get your first attempt in, but then you are kind of setting yourself up potentially for failure because now you have to decide your second and third attempt in the moment. As soon as you come off the platform for your first attempt, you have 60 seconds to pick your second attempt. So as soon as you're walking off, your clock is running. You have to come to the coach. You have to discuss with them how you're feeling. You have to communicate with them. Hopefully you both know kilograms. If one of you knows kilograms, one of you knows pounds, then it's confusion of figuring out the conversion on your phone or something like that, and then running everything out. And also during this whole time, you just did a somewhat heavy attempt. So obviously you might be a little bit fatigued and you're trying to kind of think about things as you after you just did a heavy lift. And also you may be emotional. So in the moment, you may make a rash decision because you're being emotional and you're trying to go for specific numbers, or you saw a competitor do something rather than following a plan and a strategy. And then obviously there's like the worst case scenario where people don't come in with any sort of plan. They just kind of wing it and are like, okay, I'll just see how warm-ups are going. I'll see how my weight is at weigh-ins and kind of make a decision. And then I'll just change my opener, based on what I put at weigh-ins. I'll just change it based on the warm-up and kind of just wing it. And obviously those are rare, but it does still happen these days. And that really sets you up for failure. And we don't want to set you up for failure. Again, we want to set you up for success. So the first important thing that comes to my mind is having some kind of game plan. Now, does that mean you have to follow it exactly as written with no changes? No. Obviously, things are going to change on the day based on how you're feeling as an athlete, based on what the coach is seeing from the competitors, the speed of the competition, how the refereeing is being done, those kind of things. And that's why it can be beneficial as well to have options for second and third attempts to pull things up if things are going great, pull things down if things are not going great, or maybe stay in the middle if things are going as planned. Okay, so what I like to see it or think about more is like, some kind of rough draft. So if you remember in school, or if you are currently in school, maybe you have to write some kind of essay for school. So you don't just go straight into writing your final copy of what your essay is going to be. Okay. You may kind of plan out, okay, this is the topic I want to write my essay on. Let me break it up into bullet points. So I'll have some kind of intro. I'll have maybe these 3 bullet points that I want to cover and some kind of then conclusion. And then you'll write out a rough draft. Okay. And sometimes even some teachers have you turn in the rough draft. They'll kind of give you their thoughts and then you go and correct it and get your final draft. Or you just write out your rough draft and then you can review it yourself. You can review it with a tutor or something like that. And then you kind of finalize it and then turn it in. So same thing here, the game plan before the actual meet day, like what I've been writing now for my clients, I'm going to show you for age division nationals that's happening next week based on when I'm recording this, but when you're listening, it's already happened, is a rough draft going into the competition next week. This is our plan of attack for warm-ups and attempts. Then we can make adjustments based on how the athlete's travel was to the competition, how the athlete's cut was to make their weight class, how the athlete feels warming up, the speed of the competition, what the competitors are doing, all that based on as well what our primary goal is for the competition. So we may change the plan. We may remove a warm up if we run out of time. We may pull down the opener if things are not feeling good. We may have to push the third deadlift higher than we're expected if we're trying to pull for the win or something like that. Okay, so it's a rough draft. Some people freak out. They're like, oh, this is our game plan. We can't change anything and I want to go for more weights. And it's like, no, let's have a plan of attack. Right now, when we're not emotional, when we're not crunched for time, based on how training is going, based on the goals for the competition, everything like that, what do we think is going to happen? What's the most likely scenario? And then let's go on with that. And then we'll be flexible on the day of to make adjustments if we need to. So let me go ahead and share my screen here, and I'll show you some of the game plans that I have for my actual athletes coming up at the age division nationals, so you can get an idea of what I am talking about here. So here we can take a look for one of my athletes, and I can always make this a little bigger for you all as well to see. And if you're listening to this episode, not watching, then you can kind of just listen to what I'm going through as far as what this game plan has, or you can kind of note of this timestamp and always go back and watch it when you have a chance to actually look at the video. So this is for one of my athletes, Shelly, a new athlete of mine. She's a Masters 4 competitor in the 63 kilo class. And you can see this is what our strategy is for the age division nationals. And you can see this is the standard template that we use for TSG. And then we just input everything for the athlete. So if you are listening, at the top of our templates, we have information about each athlete's lifts. So for example, for the squat, we have what is their personal record in a competition? What did they hit in their last competition? What is their latest assessment? And then what is their training one or max that we're using? So we can use kind of like those 4 data points to help build out our attempts. So we have that for squat, bench press, and deadlift. Below that are the warm-up weights for squat, bench press, and deadlift. And for each warm-up weight, we have the weight, we have the number of reps that's going to be done. And in this case, I also put in the about what time I think I should have my athlete take it so that we can be prepared for their opening attempt. I'm estimating kind of where they're going to be as far as the opening attempts as well. I'll show you that in a second. Below the warm-ups then are the attempts for squat, bench press, and deadlift. And for that, each second attempt is going to have 2 options, potentially, if you want to put in some flexibility in there. And then each third attempt is going to have up to 3 options. So our opener is kind of what we're going to turn in at weigh-ins before we kind of know how the day is going. We can always adjust that, but we want to turn something in at weigh-ins. And then after the opening attempt, we have the option to go potentially to 2 different second attempts based on how things feel. And then based on what our second attempt is and how it goes, we have potential for some third attempt options. So we're not kind of set in stone in one attempt. So this template gives us that ability to have some flexibility in there. Then on the right side of the template just has information about the athlete. Here I have that they are on platform 2, flight A. We have information about their best total and then their last competition, what they total. We have a section for nutrition if the athlete wants to put in like what they need to be eating and drinking after weigh-ins, what they need to be taking during warm-ups, all that kind of stuff, depending on whether they're cutting weight or not. Then we have a section for objectives and notes. So you can put in like, what is your primary objective? Which, for example, for Shelly, we want to win and hit the minimum qualifying total needed to make the team for the World Championships. Then from there, we can have secondary goals as far as like hitting personal records or hitting national records. So maybe let's say the national records are more important because you can only hit the national records at national, international competitions. And then the personal records are lower level because you can always just hit those at a local competition. Then below that notes section, we have a final little small section to mark down what are the records. So if we are going for the national record, we want to have a note of what the record is for each lift so we can easily see it on the sheet and make sure we're chipping it properly rather than trying to stumble and pull it up on our phone. And then at the very bottom, we can start tracking the competition as well. So as the competition is going, we can mark what weight did we hit on the squat, how many attempts do we make, and kind of keep track of everything as we're going. And also, then we can reference it back and see what was our final numbers, what was our final number of attempts made, everything like that. So that's kind of our attempt sheet. Now you, as an athlete, you can build out your own attempt sheet, or depending on what your coach gives you, may look slightly different. But you want to have kind of all that information that will hopefully fit on one piece of paper. So that way I can print this out and I can have one piece of paper referencing everything I need for this athlete going into the competition. Now, if I need to pull up additional stuff, maybe I need to look up the rule book, or maybe I want to pull up a competitor's past performance, I can maybe do that with a separate sheet or pull it up on my phone. But here's just one sheet, quick reference, so that I can then be ready for weigh-ins to tell the opening attempts to the referee. I can be ready for warm-ups with what warm-ups I need to load, how many reps I need to tell the athlete to do, what time they need to take those warm-ups as well. And then as we are doing the actual competition and we're on the platform doing the attempts, I can easily reference what our plan was as our options for second and third attempts, and then what were our previous numbers from training and previous competitions to see, hey, are we going for the personal record? Are we going for competing against someone and trying to go for first place? I have reference for the national records as well if we are chipping a record, everything like that. Okay, real quick, I can show you as well, this timer here is based on this little timing sheet we have on the right. Okay, so we have this little system where you can just put in how many flights there are, how many lifters are in each flight, which flight is your athlete in, what time does the competition start, and then how many warm-ups does the athlete have for each lift, and where do you think in the order that athlete will be. So here I'm just doing an estimate based on me looking at the nominated totals and estimating where my athlete will be for each lift. But then once the openers go in after weigh-ins, you could theoretically come into this file and put in what the actual first attempt order is. And then at the bottom here for each warm-up, you can put how much rest do you want after each warm-up. And then this will build out the timer. So this is saying, for example, for Shelly, if we start warming up our squat at 8:34 a.m., we will then be done warming up at 8:54 a.m., so about 20 minutes to warm up, and that will give her about 11 minutes before she has to go out on the platform and do her opening attempt. Now, if we want to have more time, then we can just adjust these prescribed rest times to be more time. And also, if we want to start earlier, we can say, hey, maybe we should start at 8:30 just in case, because it's better to start early and then be able to slow things down than to start late and rush through things. And maybe there'll be a lot of people warming up in the same rack, and maybe we won't be able to do the prescribed rest times that we want because someone else will still be warming up. So maybe we start 8:30 just to be safe. Okay. And then you can see the same thing for bench press and delve. It's just basing it on how the previous flight is going, because now the competition is going. So when the previous flight is squatting, we'll start warming up our bench press. And when the previous flight is benching, we'll start warming up our deadlift. And then it also includes the break. So this is, saying that, hey, it's 2 flights. So there's going to be a 10-minute break. So it's taking that into account as well. So this is what I consider. Obviously, I'm biased because this is our template and this is what I use for our athletes. But this is what I consider like a high-level meet day strategy template, and being highly prepared when it comes to this aspect, because this covers maybe not every single thing that you might need or that every athlete needs, because every athlete may have some small different things that they need or don't need, but this covers most athletes' needs of what they need. You can see even here at the very top, we have sections to put in the rack height information. So if they already know the rack height, for example, on a Lico rack, then they can put this in. So we're ready to go when it comes to check-ins and turning in the rack heights. But even if they don't, when we do the rack height, then we can mark it here. So I don't need to ask for every single warm-up. Hey, what's your rack height again? What's your rack height again? I can just reference it here. So everything here on this template is kind of what I need to, again, set the athlete up for success. That is my goal as a coach on meet day, is trying to put the athlete in the best position to be successful. And I'm taking care of all this stuff for them. So I am doing the timing for them. I'm doing the loading for them. I'm telling them how many reps to do. And that's why I'm preparing this mostly for myself as a coach. Okay. And you as an athlete should have a handler that is going to have this kind of information so they can take care of all that stuff. And then they just tell you as an athlete, okay, you need to go now. You need to do 3 reps. You can have additional information. Okay, put your belt on, put your knee sleeves on, put your bench shirt on, whatever like that. We're going to do commands. You can add those additional notes in there. And also things like nutrition. Okay, now take your caffeine. Okay, now make sure you're eating your banana, whatever. Everything is on here. So this is what I consider a high level template, and being able to prepare the athlete for success when it comes to game day. So I think that is an important thing, because I'm seeing different things out there, like I said, as people maybe only giving attempts and not giving warm-ups, or people giving maybe warm-ups and openers and not giving attempts, like as far as second and third attempts, different variations of that that maybe are a good start, but I would say that they're not high level because it still has different weaknesses that may set the athlete up for failure. Okay. So I think that's one of the important things. Like I said, having some kind of game plan. Next thing regard goes into regarding making weight. Okay. And I'm trying to figure out exactly how to word this because not everyone needs to cut weight. So there can be different problems depending on what your situation is. Okay. So for example, if you are cutting weight, your problem could be that you are cutting too much weight if you're walking around too heavy, or that maybe you overcut. So whether you are too heavy or not, you may be overcut. So what I mean by those two things is that, okay, let's say you're 3% over your weight class. Okay, so if you're trying to cut down to the 100 kilo class, if you're in some federation that has that, you're walking around at 103. If you are, for example, in the 63 kilo weight class in the IPF, that would mean you're walking around 64.75 or 65 kilos, somewhere in that range there. Okay, so that may be good for you. Hey, I'm walking around 3% above. It's not that hard. I do a little bit of a water load. I change some of my food, and I'm able to then cut those 3%. And then some people maybe can handle 5%. Okay. So now if we go back to those same situations, you're 100 kilos, maybe you're walking around at 105. You're 63 kilos, maybe now you're walking around at 66, 66.1. Okay. Now it's going to be harder cut for you. At some point for each athlete, it's going to be, more and more detrimental than just going to the higher weight class. Now, obviously, that can sometimes depend too on how competitive each weight class is when you go to higher levels, but maybe just looking at yourself, okay, if you're walking around at 66 kilos and cutting to 63, and then you're walking around 67 kilos and cutting to 63, and you're walking around 68 kilos and cutting to 63, at some point it's going to affect your strength so much, or deplete your energy so much and lead to cramping and losing muscle mass or just missing weight and stuff, that you're just better off going into the 69 kilo class than cutting into 63. So that's one problem with making weight, is making sure you're walking around at the proper weight, especially the closer and closer you get to competition. Because again, you don't want all your training to be great, and then you're like 1 or 2 weeks out and you're like, oh man, I'm 68 kilos, I need to cut down to 63. And then you drastically cut calories, you start doing a lot of cardio, you do a huge water cut, you sauna, everything like that, and it just crushes your numbers. And again, then your performance doesn't show all the work that you've been putting in. At that point, you might be better off going up a weight class, even if you're light in that weight class, just going at 67 kilos and the 69 kilos, and then put up those great numbers and show the training that you've been doing and how successful it's been. Okay, so you want to make sure, again, in those final weeks, those final days, and those final hours, you're walking around at the proper weight in order to make the cut down to your weight. So we don't want to be walking around too heavy. And that, again, is going to vary from person to person. You're going to want to work with a nutrition coach and everything like that and test things out for yourself to see how much you can cut. Some people can cut a lot of weight. Some people get zapped very quickly and they can only cut a little bit of weight. Okay. The other thing we can look at then is, what if you're already very close to your weight or maybe even below your weight class? Because sometimes, people might see it as easy, like, oh, I'm walking around at 62. I don't have to cut weight for the 63s. Some people get stressed out the other way because now they're like, oh man, what can I eat or drink? I want to make sure I don't screw it up all of a sudden and bump up over 63. And so you have to be careful as well that if you are already walking around underweight, let's say again, you're 62 competing in the 63s, or you're 99.5 competing in the 100 kilo class, is that you are trying to maintain that weight. Okay, so if you've been training for weeks on end at 62 kilos, you want to try and maintain that 62 kilos going into the competition. Or even if you go up a little bit, like if you go up from 62 to 62.3 or something like that, or 62 down to 61.8 or 61.9, because the scale is a little bit different, that's fine. But what we want to be careful of is that people kind of sometimes freak out. They maybe change the way they eat and drink that final week and the days leading up to weigh-ins. They also have reduced their training. So maybe they're dissipating fatigue, they're reducing some inflammation and maybe losing some weight that way. And next thing you know, that 62 turns into 61, turns into 60.5. And then now they're weighing in at like 60.5 and you're like, oh, that's great. I weighed in so light. I can win on tiebreakers and everything like that. I'm going to have higher dots or GO points. What they don't realize is that that can still zap your strength. So while you may think your dots is going to be higher, your total may actually come down, and then your dots score might be the same or actually worse. So for example, if you're walking around at 62 and now you came in light for the competition at 60.5, you may miss your third attempt bench press that you would have made before if you had stayed at 62, because bench is affected by body weight so much. For some people, squat can be affected a lot by body weight as well. And also because that's the first lift of the competition, maybe you did eat and drink less going into weigh-ins, and then you're not going to be able to put enough of it back on after weigh-ins because maybe you weren't prepared because you're not doing any kind of water load or anything like that. And then that leads to messing up the squat as well. So now maybe you lose 5 kilos on squat, 2.5 kilos on bench press, you lose 7.5 kilos off your total. So yeah, you're maybe a kilo and a half lighter, but you also lost 7.5 kilos off your total. So we want to be careful of when we're making weight that we are not cutting from too high of a point. We're walking around at a good weight year round that we can make our weight class regularly. And then also, if you're already walking around at weight or below weight, that you aren't then freaking out and going down too far and depleting yourself. And then that can lead to not hitting the numbers that you want. Now, with both of these cases, okay, like I said, even if you're walking around at weight, you want to be prepared then. What are you going to do after weigh-ins and what are you going to do throughout the competition? So that's another thing, is sometimes people aren't prepared. Just like we're making this meet day strategy template and building out a game plan for warm-ups and attempts, you may want to build a game plan of what you need on the day of the competition as far as food and drinks, okay? And that could then be preparing it in advance. So like, for example, I'm flying out tomorrow. So if I was competing, I may want to make my list now and see what things am I going to buy here at home, pack with me and bring, and what things am I going to buy at the location. Once I get there, I'm going to find a grocery store, whatever, and buy things and bring it with me. So you want to look into things like, what do you want to drink? Are you going to go for some kind of electrolyte drink, a Gatorade, Pedialyte? Are you going to go for water? How much of it do you need? Making sure you bring a gallon jug or whatever. Don't rely on the venue having enough water or having water at all or selling Gatorade or anything like that. You want to come prepare with your stuff. And then if you want to use like, powders like electric packets or anything like that, okay, do you want to maybe buy them and bring them with you? If you're going to go for anything like pre-workouts, then again, you may want to pack all that stuff and bring with you, and don't rely on being able to find some supplement store in the location and try and buy stuff there, especially once you start going into other countries. So if you're traveling internationally for like a regional or international championship, then you don't know what they're going to be selling in that country. Okay, what are the brands that they sell in that country? How easy is it to access those things at a grocery store versus a convenience store? How common are supplement stores in that place? And then also then in the city within that country, maybe it's a smaller city, those kind of things. So you want to, don't rely on just going to the place and the place being the same as where you live and be able to get things very easily. You want to then, again, like I said, build that list. Try and bring as much of that stuff with you that you already have. You know how it affects you. It's your brand, everything like that. You're going to bring it with you. You know you have it. And then maybe some things you'll buy at the location. If you want to buy some bananas, if you want to buy some water, those kind of things, maybe you buy that at the location. Okay. Then from that list, you want to also make sure you're scheduling when you're going to have stuff. Okay. So as soon as you finish weighing in, what are you going to have? And then maybe like, before you warm up, what else you're going to have while you're warming up? What are you going to have? What are you going to have between squat and bench press? What are you going to have between bench press and deadlift? So you want to detail all those things out. And that's another thing that I've seen that some people maybe don't schedule, or just maybe they're too like nonchalant or laid back about it, especially like someone who cuts weight. So let's say someone, like we said, was cutting weight 3%, 5%. Okay, they go and do their water load, they do their gut cut, everything like that. They make weight. Now, the way I see it is, as soon as you step off that scale, your job now is to put that weight back on, or as much of it as you can back on. Okay, and get the energy stores back up, get the carbs, the electrolytes, everything back in you. So I see it as like a job. Okay. Some people kind of see eating and drinking still as enjoyment. Okay. So they are making food at home or going out with friends and trying out different foods for enjoyment. And then when it comes to competition, then they made weight and then they're like, oh, well, I'm not that hungry, or oh, I don't like that. I don't like bananas, or I don't like peanut butter sandwiches, whatever. And maybe then they're like talking to people or like posting how they made weight and stuff like that. And so they're too nonchalant about it. And then that leads to slower timing as far as getting fluids back in you, getting the carbs back in you and everything like that. And then again, you're not getting your weight back up, you're not getting your energy back up, and then you're not going to be able to perform as well. Then if you turn it into your job, like I said, like you aren't eating for fun, you aren't drinking for fun. Some of these things are not tasty, some of it's nasty, it's not fun chugging a bunch of salty water or whatever like that, but it is your job to do that, just like it was your job to cut down and make the weight. Then it is now your job to eat and drink what you need to put the weight back on. So that's kind of the way I think about it, is again having everything prepared, making the list, and then putting the timing in it, and having everything ready to go. So like for example, I've done some water cuts, not necessarily to be competitive because I'm not very competitive, but just to try it out and go through the process to see what it's like and be able to experience what my athletes and other athletes experience so I can help them out with it. So the way I would do it is I would take my electrolyte drink with me into weigh-ins with my ID, and I had my openers memorized, but you can have it on your phone or print it out. So I go into the weigh-in room, I put everything on the table or on the floor. You give them your ID, you tell them your openers, you strip down, you weigh in. As soon as you weigh in, they say you're good. I come back, I grab the the Pedialyte or the whatever electrolyte drink, I open it up and I start drinking it. So like there's literally like no time between you made weight and you're starting to get back to original weight. So ideally you want to kind of like be at your walking around weight, cut down to the weight class for as short of a time period as possible, and get back up to your normal weight as fast as possible. So it's like a little bit of a blip, okay, of what your body weight is actually doing. What we don't necessarily want is like you cut too early and then now you've been like in a deficit and you've been low on weight for weeks or whatever like that. And then you are underweight when you make weight, and then you're lazy and it takes time and you only make back like 25% or 50% of your weight. We want it to just be a quick little blip that, hey, I just dipped down real quick to make this weight class just for it to be on the scale for a second and then back off. So as soon as you step off that scale, you should be, if you're going to do some kind of, water cut, gut cut, and everything like that, start drinking, because usually fluids is what you want to have first. Start drinking those fluids again. So depending on, again, what the way is as far as what they ask for openers, when they ask for rack heights, when you sign whatever, okay, it may be slightly different, but sometimes I'm like chugging in the drink when I come off the scale and then telling, hey, my opener is 100 kilos on squat, 50 kilos on bench, 125 on deadlift, and then boom, I'm back to chugging, grab my stuff, go outside, keep drinking, and then going to the next step. Okay, I finished this drink. Next step is to eat the salty food or whatever, let that digest, go over to the warm-up area. Okay, it's 20 minutes before warming up, I need to have this next thing. And then also like, okay, between squat and bench press, I need to drink this much water. Between bench press and deadlift, I need to drink this much water. If you're going to have caffeine or pre-workout, timing all that as well. So making it a job, you are like a machine. Okay, you're a robot. It doesn't matter what you're eating or drinking, whether you like it or not. You are just going to do these things as you're going to do them to make sure, again, you're setting yourself up for success for these competitions. So that's kind of another area where I see people kind of slack off, whether it's, cutting too much weight, whether it's being underweight and then dropping down too much. And also, what are you going to do on meet day to put the weight back on, or even if you're not cutting weight, to make sure you're properly energized to be successful throughout the competition. Another area that I see this, now we're going a little bit farther back. So we're going from like meet day, and now we're going to just before meet day, is how people are tapering for meet day. Okay. And so you can think of kind of like a taper or a deload as a similar concept, is that we are training, okay, a certain way, and we're training a lot of times, we're building up fatigue. And now, when it comes time for the competition, we need to dissipate that fatigue, because if we get rid of that fatigue, then our performance is going to go up. If we go into the competition still fatigued, that fatigue is going to hold back our performance. So ideally, we want to like maximize our skill by practicing our skill and just being very honed in with our technique and confidence and execution, everything like that, and minimize our fatigues. Okay, so if we're minimizing our fatigue again, we're completely, then that's when we're going to have our best performance or peak performance. So You have to figure out how you're going to taper from your standard training from when you're peaking into the day of the competition. Okay. And there's different ways to do it. Okay. We won't go into all the details. There are different ways of, are you going to taper for 1 week? Are you going to taper for multiple weeks? Are you going to step down the volume, for example, multiple weeks? Are you going to keep the volume high and drop it down in a single week? Okay, there's different ways to do it as far as how you're going to taper off the volume intensity. We can't go into all of it right now. It's going to take a long time. Maybe in a future podcast episode, we can go over different tapering strategies. If that's something that interests you, then wherever you're listening, just drop a comment below and say, yes, I'd love to see an episode going over different tapering strategies. But some of the things for you to think about just in general when it comes to your tapering process or when you're working with a coach is, for example, how many days are you going to take off before the competition day? Are you going to take 1 day off, 2 days off, a week off? With that as well, it's going to be how are you going to affect the different variables. So, for example, how much volume you're going to cut, how much intensity you're going to cut, are you going to make any changes to frequency, those kind of things. Okay. So again, we can't go into all the details here, but what I can do is go back and share for my athletes that are competing, some examples of what they are doing and why we are doing it. Okay. So let me share my screen here again. And the first person again we can look at is Shelly here, my Masters 4 63 kilo lifter. This is our first training cycle that we're working together. And this is our first competition. So here you can see where she started at the end of January. And we're competing at Masters Nationals. So there's about 16 weeks of training that we're doing together. And I already showed you what her game plan looks like. Now I can show you what the taper looks like. Okay. And again, if you're just listening, I'll try and explain it as best as possible. So here we can see on day 1, I'm keeping her exercises the same. I'm not changing anything. So she's doing her standard safety squat bar squats and her standard bench press. You can see though, I took out the accessory work. I took out the Bulgarian split squats and dips. So typically for this kind of taper where I'm just stepping down the volume the week of the competition, we're taking out almost all or all of the accessory exercises because we want to, again, not fatigue the person. We're trying to dissipate the fatigue. We're trying to recover. And so the accessory exercises are less important than the main lifts. So we can remove those to help dissipate that fatigue. And they're not going to necessarily lose all their strength or their muscle mass all of a sudden in 1 week just because we took out Bulgarian split squats for the week of the competition. They'll be completely fine. So here we're taking out the split squats and the dips to start allowing for some recovery. We'll go over the main lifts as well, but I want to kind of give a quick breakdown of the days. Day 2, she's still doing her competition deadlifts like we've always been doing, but we're taking out the pull-ups and the bent over rows. Again, removing the accessory exercise, even that though that's like back and it's not necessarily the main lifts, the primary movers, we still want to take it out. Day 3 here, she's still doing her squat and bench press like we normally do, but we're taking out the reverse flies and the dips. Day 4, she's still doing her bench press like we normally do, but we're taking out the bicep curls and the tricep pushdowns. And then day 5, we're taking out completely. So normally day 5 is a SBD day. You can see competition squats, long pause bench, competition deadlifts, and pull-ups. We're taking all that out. The reason for this obviously is because she needs to, have some days off before the competition. Okay. So what does this do to the different variables? Well, 1, we can see obviously it reduces the frequency by 1 because we're taking out day 5 and day 5 is an SBD day. We're reducing the frequency by 1. So the way I think about it is I want to try and maintain the frequency during the competition week if I can, but I'm going to count the meet day as one of those frequencies. So for example, if your person or you are squatting 3 times per week, then the competition day will be 1 time. So I'm going to do 2 training sessions and then competition day will be my 3rd day. If I am deadlifting twice, then competition day will be 1 and the training session will be 1. Okay, so that's the way I kind of calculate the frequency to try and match what they're used to doing. Okay, what we don't want to do is like someone is used to deadlifting twice a week and then we still deadlift twice a week and do the competition and now they're deadlifting 3 times in a week, something they're not used to. And also we don't want to go the other way. If someone's used to doing like high frequency bench press, they're bench pressing 5 times per week. We don't want to go from bench pressing 5 times per week and then just do like one session on Monday and then rest all the way to Saturday, because that's not what they're used to. They may detrain that way. They may lose their skill that way. So we're trying to maintain the frequency as best as we can. Okay. Next, we're dropping out all the accessory exercises, or most of them. If you have to keep something in for like rehab work, whatever, maybe you do that, but try and cut out almost everything or everything. So that's going to naturally reduce the volume, because those things are still targeting triceps, pecs, quads, glutes potentially. And so we're reducing the volume there. We can then also reduce the volume and the intensity on the competition lifts. Okay, so if I zoom in here and come over here to the right and look at some of our stats, one of the columns we can look at is this column called last week. And what that is doing is comparing the total volume for each lift. The first row here, squat, second is bench, the third is deadlift, compared to the previous week's volume. So what is the taper week's volume compared to the previous week's volume? So here we can see for squat, we are doing 50% of the volume from the previous week. Okay. And I found that that works fairly well for a lot of people when it comes to squat. Okay. We don't need to go down to, removing 90% of the volume, okay, and just do nothing the week of the competition. And also we don't want to only cut out, 10 or 5% of the volume, or keep the volume the same, because then we may be building up fatigue. But I've noticed for a lot of people for squat, they can handle about 50% of the volume. Now, you may want to individualize it for your lifter and go up and down based on if maybe squat fatigues them more. Maybe you go down from, instead of 50%, you go down to 40% of the previous week's volume. Or if the person is very well built for squat and they don't get fatigued from it all, they're not cutting weight or anything like that, then maybe you put a little bit more in, 55% or 60%. Okay, so you can play with this. But for this kind of taper where we're just stepping down from the previous week into the week of the competition, around 50% is a good spot that we've found here with TSG. For bench press, you can see it's a little bit higher, 59%, because we found with a lot of our athletes, in all the different age groups, even though Shelly here's a Masters 4, is that around 60%, because most people can handle more bench press volume than squat and deadlift, which, could be different reasons, because it's one upper body lift versus two lower body lifts. It could be because it's smaller muscles and maybe those recover faster. It can be for different reasons, but most people notice they can do more frequency, more volume for bench press. Then for squat and deadlift, some people can do more for squat and the lowest for deadlift, or some people can kind of just do less for both squat and deadlift. So we don't necessarily need to cut as much volume out for bench press. We can kind of maintain more volume in. And typically for bench press, if we're maintaining more volume in, it'll be more responsive when it comes time to max out. If we cut out too much volume here the week of, then the bench kind of drops off very quickly. So here you can see we're keeping 60% of the previous week's volume in. Then for deadlift, you can see it's the lowest, 30%. Because again, what we've noticed is a lot of people for deadlift, they can't handle as much volume. And for some people, again, it depends on how you're built. If you're doing conventional, you're doing sumo, if you're doing hook grip, those kind of things, maybe deadlift can be a little bit more risky. So maybe you like tweak something in your back on a final deadlift session, whereas for bench press, you may not. Or maybe on your final deadlift session, you like rip open a callus or like hurt yourself doing hook grip or something like that and kind of mess up your grip. And now that's going to negatively affect you a lot for deadlift. And so sometimes that can be a little bit more risky for people doing a lot of deadlifts or doing a lot of heavy deadlifts leading up. And so that's why we typically reduce the volume more and play a little bit safer. And so deadlift can usually handle less volume and maybe keep some intensity in there to kind of compensate it for it if you want to. So we kind of try and do 30%. Okay, so if you are an athlete that's coaching yourself, maybe you can use this as a guide, or if you're working with a coach or a new coach, whatever, you can maybe test out this kind of system. Now, again, it depends on how fatigued you are and different variables. The more fatigued you are going into the week of the competition, you may have to reduce the volume more. The less fatigued you are going into the competition, then maybe you reduce it less. If you're going to do a bigger caloric deficit and weight cut and stuff like that, maybe you have to reduce the volume more for more recovery. If you're not doing any of those kind of things, you're in a caloric surplus, that kind of stuff, maybe you can keep it a little bit higher. So there's different things that are going to change this. But with our system of how we program for athletes, this is a kind of good number for us. 50% of the volume for squat, 60% of the volume for bench press, 30% of the volume for deadlift. Okay. If we look at a couple more columns here on the right, we can see average intensity and peak intensity. You can see for both of these, they're going down because the previous week was either our highest intensity or one of the highest intensities. So obviously, if we're doing like 95% or 97.5% for a top single, then obviously we have to bring that down the week of the competition. So here you can see we're closer to 80% on squat and deadlift for peak intensity and 82.5% for peak intensity for bench press. We're kind of coming down. If we take a look at week 15, the previous week real quick to compare, we can see we're at 96 and 97% of peak intensity. So we drop from that 96, 97%, which is around like a second attempt or maybe slightly above a second attempt, down here to this 80, 82.5%, which is like warm-up weights, okay? So we are bringing down the intensity, which is obviously going to bring down the effort as well, because we're keeping the same reps or going to fewer reps to bring down the volume as well. And so that drop in peak intensity and that drop in effort is going to help with dissipating fatigue. In this case, the average intensity is going down as well. You can see the average intensity the previous week was 79% for squat, 81% for bench, 86% for deadlift. And then now we're going down to 71% for squat, 78% for bench press, and 79% for deadlift. So everything is below 80% now for our average intensity and right around 80% for our peak intensity. So again, we're bringing down the average intensity as well to allow for easier protocols to allow for recovery. Okay. Typically, you don't have to drop intensity as much as volume. For a lot of people, volume is going to affect a lot more how fatigued they are versus intensity. Obviously, within a range, you can obviously give extreme examples and say, what if we're doing 100% intensity or whatever? Then yes, in those examples, maybe bringing down intensity will help as well. But a lot of times, powerlifters have noticed they can kind of keep intensity high and not get fatigued as much versus doing volume. That's why there's people that do very high frequency and then recover fine for the next session. Some people do very high frequency with like daily maxing, and you're able to maintain their strength or even get stronger. So you may do, maxing out bench press Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and hit your best bench on Thursday or Friday. So sometimes it doesn't make sense, but typically the intensity doesn't fatigue the person as much. So you can keep some intensity in if you want to maintain your skill and feel comfortable under heavier weights. That's why some people even do like their opening weights at the beginning of the competition week to kind of maintain that intensity. The volume is kind of what's going to really help with dissipating the fatigue. That's what the research shows, and that's what our experience shows as well. So that's why we do this kind of 50, 60, 30 rule for volume. And then the intensity just depends on how we're adjusting the protocols to allow the volume to come down, allow the effort to come down to have those easier protocols to recover. Okay, so you can see here we're keeping it simple as far as keeping the same exercise that the athletes used to. Very similar protocols as far as sets and reps, maybe reducing one rep, reducing one set in order to bring that volume down, bringing the effort levels down. You can see everything's going to be like RP 6 or below. And you can see for this athlete logging the RPs, you can see a lot of RP 4s across the board, which is going to allow for recovery. And then removing the accessory work, and then having adequate rest days. Okay, so it depends on what your schedule is going to be as far as if you're traveling, what days you're traveling, if you can train at the location of the competition, or if you have to train at home. But in this case, for this athlete, for Shelly, we are doing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, kind of the same as she normally does in training. We're taking Thursday off to allow for a little bit of recovery, doing a final light bench press on Friday, and then she has to go and travel. So we're taking Saturday, Sunday, and Monday off, and then competing on Tuesday. So in this case, she's getting 3 full days off from her final session. Sometimes I like to take 2 full days off, so I could like shift all this over and have the final bench press like on Saturday. But again, it depends on how fatigued the person is and traveling, everything like that. And then if you're training with lower frequency, you may have more space. So for example, if we're looking at the deadlift, that's lower frequency, the deadlift is on Tuesday, and then she's competing the following Tuesday. So it's basically a week off. We could have, again, maybe shifted this to Wednesday if we wanted to based on the schedule, but, this schedule works fine. So Again, finding out those final bits of pieces will depend on those kind of things, like how many training sessions the person normally does, what kind of frequency the person normally does, which day are they traveling, can they train at home before they travel, or can they train at the venue or some kind of gym in the new location once they arrive there, to figure those things out. But typically, if someone's training like very high frequency, you want to maybe take one day off. So if they're training bench press 5, 6, 7 times per week, maybe if they're competing on Saturday, you take Friday off and do Thursday as their final light bench session. If they're more moderate frequency, you can maybe take 2 days off. So if you're competing on Saturday, maybe you take Thursday and Friday off and you train Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Wednesday being like the final light session for bench or for squat and bench press. And then if you're training with lower frequency or if you're more fatigued, those kind of things, maybe you then shift it more into 3 days off or even 4 days off. So maybe you're doing a light session on Monday or Monday and Tuesday, and then resting the rest of the week until Saturday. You don't want to take the whole week off. I would not suggest that. You don't want to take the whole week off from the main lifts and only do accessory work and do like bodybuilding style stuff. I would not recommend that either. You want to keep things as close to what you've been doing, okay, and as simple as you can keep it, and make those small adjustments. So these are the things we found to be beneficial for our athletes to have success across age divisions, weight classes, everything like that. So that's why I want to show you these other examples as well. So this was Shelly, and like I said, she's a Masters 463. Now I want to show you another one of my athletes, Katie here, who's a Masters 163. So same weight class, but now we're Masters 1 instead of Masters 4. Here again is her game plan for the competition with all the weights and the reps for the warm-ups, the timing for the warm-ups, all the attempts, everything like that. And then we can take a look at the stats here for the taper. Okay, so if we're going over here, looking at the last week, we can see squat is at 54%. So again, close to that 50%. You're not going to always get it exactly just because how you manipulate the sets and reps and even the weights, you may not be able to get 50% on the dot. You know, you might have with an additional rep, it might be 54%. If you remove the rep, it might be like 48% or something like that. So you can't always get it perfect. But again, that can be a guide. And then from there, you can always adjust. So if the person maybe is not as fatigued, you can kind of keep a little more in. In this case, you know, Katie, like I said, is an 8M1. She's not cutting weight. Things are kind of feeling good. So I just happened to go a little bit higher, 54%. For bench press, you can see it's 59%. Again, I couldn't get 60% exactly on the dot, but it's perfectly fine that it's 59%. It falls pretty close in range of what we've done across all our athletes and what I've done for Katie before that she's had success with. And then Delph, you can see, is a little bit higher, 35%. Again, not a big deal. In this case as well, if we take a look at the schedule, okay, so you can see here, she does day 1, her squat and bench press like normal, took out the accessory work. Day 2, deadlift like normal, took out the accessory work. Day 3, squat and bench press like normal, took out the accessory work. Day 4, took out the deadlift, but kept in the bench press, okay, to keep a little bit more bench press frequency and volume in there. And also just comes down to what day your athlete's competing on again and kind of getting those final sessions in. So here in this case, you know, a lot of times at local meets, you might be used to competing on a Saturday or competing on a Sunday. So you can kind of do the beginning of your training week the same and then make those adjustments in those final days. But then as you start getting into other competitions like national and world championships, sometimes you compete on a Tuesday or a Wednesday or a Thursday, and things get a little bit tricky. So you have to then work backwards. So here you can see this athlete, Katie, is competing on a Wednesday, okay, the 20th, okay? And also she has to travel to the location. So I have to factor that in. So here you can see, I just have her taking the previous days, Tuesday, Monday, and Sunday off. So we're going to do our final session here on Saturday. And so that's why I kept that bench press in, is that because it's not a taper week as far as like Monday into Saturday, it's more of a taper week as far as Monday into Wednesday. So it's a little bit longer. And so I don't want to, again, drop off the frequency and the volume too much on bench press too soon and like stop bench pressing on, let's say, Wednesday or Thursday and go like a full week without bench pressing. I want to kind of keep, again, that frequency and that volume as high as possible for as long as possible and then drop it off. So we're going to try and train longer throughout the week, okay, into, you know, Friday, Saturday into the weekend, and then still have a number of days off before the competition. So plenty of time to recover for that competition. Right? Then I can show you another example here. This is another one of my athletes competing, Jermaine, who's also a Masters 1, but he's a 105 kilo lifter. Okay, so similar age, but now we're a different weight class, different gender. And so we can take a look at Jermaine's numbers. Okay, so here you can see again the game plan, very similar as far as building everything out, having everything planned out for this athlete. So I'm ready to go for coaching him that session. And then we can take a look at the training here, and let me zoom in. So here you could see day 1 doing the lifts that he normally does, high bar squats and long pause bench, taking out the accessory work, except for I just kept 2 sets of biceps in. Then for day 2, doing deadlifts like we normally have, I kept 2 sets of rear delts in just to kind of work the rear delts a little bit from all the pressing work and have just some work in there. He's also competing on Wednesday, so we do have more time. If he was competing like on Saturday and this was being done on Tuesday or Wednesday, then obviously I would take the stuff out. But because if he's doing this on Tuesday and competing the following Saturday, 8 days later, 2 sets of rear delts is going to be fine. Day 3, we have a light squat and bench press, keeping the main lifts in, taking out the accessory work. And then day 4, similar to what I had for Katie, is taking out the deadlifts, but maintaining the bench press and then taking out the accessory work. Because again, he's also competing on Wednesday, so we do have a little bit extra time to work with. And so I want to maintain a little bit of bench press in. You can see this is very easy. A single at 77.5% is going to be very low RPE, and then 3 doubles at 70%. Very low RP. This is going to be a quick session. You can do this in 15 minutes, and it's going to be, RP 3 or 4 or 5 maybe. So it's just very light work just to keep the body moving, just to maintain technique, everything like that, and have a good performance at the competition rather than stopping too soon. So here again, doing the squat and bench press day 1 on Monday, doing a deadlift on day 2 on Tuesday, taking Wednesday, Thursday off to start having some recovery. Then doing the next squat and bench press session, the light squat bench press day 3 on Friday, and then the very light day 4 bench press on Saturday. Then we can take Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday off, 3 full days off to travel, get to the location, get settled, everything like that, and then compete on Wednesday. So if we take a look at the numbers here for Jermaine for last week, you can see again, very similar to what I've been discussing. 47% here on squat. So again, close to that 50%. Again, you can't always get it exactly 50%. And in the case of Jermaine, our final squat was pretty challenging. It was like a RP 10, maybe a 9.5, just because he fell a little bit out of position. And so he had to put a little work to kind of get himself back in the position. But it was basically an all-out grinder. And so just pulling the volume back a little bit more. And then also you can see the intensity, peak intensity going down 13%, average intensity going down 8%, and all these protocols will be easy for him, will allow for a little bit more recovery going into the competition. Bench press has been going great, especially the last 2 weeks have been improving. And so here, 62%. Again, can't get it exactly 60%. Also, we do have a little bit of additional time, like I said, because he's competing on Wednesday. So I can put in a little bit more volume just because he's performing well. He's not as fatigued. And also, we have a little bit extra time to work with. So I want to keep that volume in and keep that frequency in with day 4 that I showed you to not lose that bench press skill and strength by taking too many days off. And then for deadlift here, you can see 32%. Again, you can't always get exactly 30%. And also in the case of a deadlift, Jermaine's been performing well on the deadlift. The squat the past couple of weeks have been the hardest of the 3. And then bench and deadlift are probably similar level. Maybe bench press has been performing a little bit better in deadlift, but overall bench and deadlift are performing very well. And so it's okay if I have a little bit more volume in for deadlift than the exact 30%. I'm still dropping, you can see the peak intensity by 15%. So it is still coming down as far as intensity. Effort's going to be very low. We are still obviously dropping the volume 68%. So it's going to be a big drop off in volume. And also we're still going to have plenty of time, because if he does this day 2, let's say on Tuesday, 7 sets of 1 at 80%, that's very easy. A lot of singles just to practice starting position and the setup with easy weights. Okay, so that'll be easy session on day 2. And then we don't have any more deadlifts. So then he's going to have 7 or 8 days off before he deadlifts again. So again, having a little bit more volume 1 week out is going to be fine. You could even do a little bit more. Some people might do actually their opener or maybe their final warm up here as like a top single 1 week out and then do some lighter sets. So you could do that as well. Here I just kept it to the 7 sets of 1 at 80% just to get some work in without fatiguing him. So that's why I have a little bit more volume in. So again, you're not going to be exactly perfect, but this may be something to kind of look into when it comes to your taper, is having some kind of system, okay, as a starting point for yourself if you coach yourself, or when you're working with a coach if you don't have any data. Hey, what have you found working with other clients, and let's test that out first. Like for example, let's say 50% of the volume for squat, 60% of the volume for bench press, 30% of the volume for deadlift. Maintain frequency, reduce average and peak intensity. Make sure you have a couple days off before the competition and test that out. See how that method works and how do the numbers go from competition into, or sorry, how the numbers go from training into the competition. And then based on a performance, look into making adjustments. Oh, bench press kind of felt off. Maybe we need to keep some more bench press volume in. Or, oh, deadlift was way too fatiguing. Maybe we need to reduce the deadlift volume more and make those kind of tweaks to then test again and see if your performance is better in the future. Okay, so that's kind of showing you a little bit behind the scenes of what we do for our athletes when it comes to the taper and the numbers we use. But again, you have to kind of individualize it for yourself. And then again, the other things that we do as far as like the meet attempt sheet, and also working with our clients making weight, especially if they're working with our nutrition coaches, to make sure, again, you as an athlete are set up for success on meet day. Everything that you've been doing in the training cycle leads to that point on meet day. And so we want to make sure you're performing your best as possible. And also when it comes to the meet day handler aspects, so like I'm going to the age division nationals to physically handle my client on the day of as well. What I'm thinking about when I'm coaching is how can I set my athlete up for success? How can I take care of as many things for them so that they don't have to worry about those things? All they have to worry about are the things that like I'm telling them to do. Like, hey, be here, ready to go for weigh-ins. Okay, make sure you're taking your fluids, make sure you're taking your pre-workout, that kind of stuff. And then saying, okay, get up, do this for 5 reps. Okay, get up, do this for 3 reps. Okay, get up, do this for 1 rep. I'm going to give you commands. Make sure you put your belt on, whatever. Getting them ready for the platform. Okay, you're 3 out. Okay, bars loaded for you, go out. And so they're just doing the things that are basically told to them. Everything's being done for them as far as timing things, weight being loaded, watching their competitors, everything like that. And then all they have to do is execute those numbers. So that's kind of what I think of when I'm coaching someone when it comes to those final weeks, final days, final hours going into the competition. And also if I'm there as a meet day handler for the athlete as well, everything I'm doing for them for meet days. For you as an athlete, again, things to think about. Are you coming into your competition, okay, whatever competition you have coming next or the last competition you did, with some kind of plan? And how good is that plan? How detailed is that plan as far as warm-ups, attempts? Do the warm-ups have the reps? Do they have the timing? Do they maybe have the weights in kilograms and pounds if you're more comfortable with pounds? Does it have your personal best on there? Does it have the national record you're trying to go for? Does it have a list of your goals? All those kind of things, okay? When it comes to your body weight, are you tracking your body weight? How far above and below is your body weight compared to your weight class? What kind of strategy do you have for making weight or maintaining your weight if you're already at weight? And then what kind of strategy do you have that as soon as you made weight, what are you going to drink? What are you going to eat? What things did you bring with you? Timing it all out. And then when it comes to tapering for the competition, when it comes to the training, okay, how are you tapering to make sure you're maximizing your skill and minimizing your fatigue to have that peak performance on meet day, which is exactly what we're hoping for, so you can perform your best on meet day, the day that it matters most throughout the year. The regular training session doesn't matter. What you do on the meet day, on that day, especially the more important ones, the national championships, the world championships, the Sheffield championships, all those are the important ones. What do you do on those days? So you want to set yourself up for success with the taper into the competition. And then if you want to hire a meet day handler, like I try and go to the competitions for my clients and coach them, but also I may coach other athletes. So, for example, at Age Division Nationals, I showed you the plans and the training for the athletes of mine that I'm coaching, but also I'm handling some people that maybe are self coached or don't have their coach there. And so, again, when it comes to a meet day handler, that's the kind of mentality I have for the day of, as I'm trying to do everything for the athlete. And so, for you as an athlete, you may want to look into a meet day handler and think about how beneficial it will be for you to have someone there for you on the day of that takes care of everything for you and relaxes you and simplifies everything for you. And you can then just focus on executing your weights. And this can be at all levels, because some people might be like, oh, well, if you're just a beginner doing a local level competition, a handler doesn't really matter because you're not competing against anyone, or you don't have to worry about going to the jury or anything like that. But in some ways, you may not need a handler, but in some other ways, the handler may be even more important, because if you're more of a beginner, then you're more prone to make these critical mistakes that I went over and other things. You may not know when to warm up. You may not know the rules of performance. You may not know kilograms to turn in the right attempts. And so having a handler for those aspects can be even more important to make sure you don't bomb out or, miss your turn or anything like that, and be able to then have a good first experience. And then when it comes to like the elite level, someone might say like, well, the elite level person doesn't need a handler because they're much more self-sufficient. They know how to warm up and they know kilogram weights and they know kind of where their strength is at. And again, some aspects, then when it comes to elite level, the handler is not useful. In other aspects, then the handler is even more useful, because now, as an elite level lifter, you may have more elite level goals. You may be trying to hit a qualifying total that's just within reach, or you may be trying to podium or win a world championship that's going to be a crazy battle, and it's not 100% guarantee that you're going to get it. And so then in those cases, having a handler can make sure they're keeping track of your competition. They know all the records and how you can chip those records. They know to go to the jury and what to say to the jury to maybe overturn a bad lift to a good lift. They know all the ins and outs. Hopefully, this is what I'm hoping, that you're finding a handler that can do this kind of stuff. They know all the ins and outs. They know all the rules. They know how to time everything. They know what to say to you at the right point to get the most out of you as an elite level lifter. They extract the most out of you, so you're not hitting 97% of your best. You're not hitting 98% of your best. You're hitting, 100% of your best, or 99% of what was expected, in order to then achieve those big goals. So if you have those big goals, you need to have the people in place to take care of everything for you to set yourself up for success. So that's why I think a meet day handler is going to be very beneficial for you, regardless of what level you are. And these are just some of the things that came to my mind as we're getting ready for the Age Division Nationals, to make sure you as an athlete are taken care of. And if you have a coach, communicating with your coach and going through these different things with them and kind of fine tuning everything and having everything structured. Or if your coach doesn't do that stuff, like your coach does the training but doesn't do the nutrition, then hey, you can talk about the training together, you can talk about the game plan together, and then you can do the nutrition on your own based on some of the ideas that I discussed here. So hopefully you guys like this episode. If you like these solo episodes where I can go into specific topics that are a little bit more scheduled and pre-planned of what I want to discuss, and sharing my screen and going over actual examples for you, then just drop a comment down below wherever you're listening and say, hey, Arian, I love these solo episodes with these deep dives into topics. Do more of those. If you don't like those, if you like me having guests on, you can comment that as well. So just leave a comment, say, hey, Arian, you suck. We don't like to hear you talk. Bring on the guests. They're more interesting, and I will do that. So we want to hear, a lot of you are listening to our podcast. We're appreciative of it, that some of you are listening to it and enjoying it at the start. So give us some feedback of what you want to see or hear more of, so we can provide that for you. And if you haven't already, be sure to leave us a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple, wherever you're listening, and I will catch you all in the next episode.